In today's episode, I'm going to share with you some of the newest advice that I know about Amazon's interviewing process that I also received, by the way, from people going through this process recently. And I'm going to touch upon subjects such as the behavioral interviewing and as well mention some of the most common mistakes that people still do while interviewing at Amazon. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about here is on whether there's any interesting pattern in a successful application at Amazon. And while sharing all these things and while building some very interesting connections with people that apply at Amazon, I've also seen a couple of them who were successful in their application. And I can tell you that the main thing that they all have in common is that they have a very strong differentiator from other people. For example, for an SD role, you could be exceptionally talented at development, at what you do, or for instance, you could have an extraordinary CV that automatically recommends you for the job. And also, I remember one case in which that particular candidate was an extraordinary communicator. So if there's one thing that you should really focus on when trying to pass through the first stages of the application, even for the on-site interviews, is to have a really strong differentiator. Now, the second thing that I wanted to talk about here is some classic mistakes, some more classic mistakes that people do while interviewing at Amazon. But not only that, but I would like to focus here on the behavioral part of the interview. And the first thing that people assume quite often, I've seen in other YouTube training videos, is that any behavioral question starts with, "Tell me about a time when." Which is not true. I mean, for example, why Amazon could also be a behavioral question if you know how to answer it. So this would be the first one. Then another classic mistake that people do is to take the advice that any behavioral answer should be under 1 minute long. Which again is false, because if you look at the best business schools in the US, they all showcase their behavioral answers on the longer side, more than 2, even 3 minutes long. Now, this being said, the best answers are always between 1 and 2 minutes in the case of Amazon, because Amazon is a peculiar company after all. So I can tell you from experience that the more you practice them, the shorter the answers will get, because this is a commercial business after all. Then next thing here is that I still see many people starting with we did something, which is again a pretty significant mistake. I mean, you should start with yourself. I did this, because the interview is about yourself. So whenever you're building such answers, please try to focus on starting on what you did, what's your specific contribution to that project. Another classic mistake that people tend to do here is to simply prepare too few stories for the actual on-site interview in particular, because imagine that during the on-site you'll have an interview that's going to last 5-6 hours, and more often than not half of that interview is behavioral. So if you only prepare 3 stories, that's not enough. You will have some sort of overlap. You will talk about the same story over and over and over again, which will of course damage your overall score within the application. Then another common mistake here is to talk about the leadership principle by using directly its precise wording. For instance, customer obsession. Like, okay, if you want to highlight customer obsession, then you can be a bit smarter than this and not say customer obsession within the answer itself. Now, of course, another classic mistake, a beginner mistake here, is to not talk about the specific leadership principles within your behavioral answer, or to talk about 5 leadership principles within your same answer. So this is again another thing to avoid. Also, the other thing that people underestimate here is how fast they will click. They will have an answer for a given question, because no matter how much you prepare to answer 10 behavioral questions, trust me, there are many of them, and I'll even demo some of them later. But the idea is here that you really must build some muscle into clicking fast and having an answer pretty fast to these types of questions. Another one would be that if you signed the non-disclosure agreement for your previous job, then you shouldn't talk too many details for that specific example. And in fact, you could also use that NDA to be particularly short on details there, and only maybe emphasize what makes sense and what puts you in a better position to get the job there. No, I'm not affiliated with Amazon in any way, and I actually tried to contact them quite a few times before, especially because I believe that this creates value also for them. But no, I'm not affiliated with Amazon in any way. Now, something else that people ask me a lot is whether if they must improve their English skills for the Amazon interview, because you know, as the interview is quite behavioral by nature, you must be able to speak for longer periods of time in English. So my answer for this would be generally no. And the reason why I say no is because you shouldn't really sugarcoat your language skills, because those are far from being the essential part for a successful application at Amazon. Instead, what I encourage you to do is to try to speak in English whenever you're trying to practice, for instance, behavioral interviewing or talking about programming or whatever job you're applying for. And this will ensure that your language skills are somewhat synchronized and with your technical skills and with your other skills. So you must make a good impression overall, not your English. If you're good at talking English, that won't score you any extra points to my knowledge. So in the beginning of the video, I said that all candidates or successful candidates that I know have something unique, either in their CV, either in their skill set. Essentially, they have a great differentiator. Now, this doesn't mean they're geniuses. So to be clear, I mean, Amazon is extremely good at hiring the people that they need for a given role. They are not necessarily looking for geniuses. Of course, if you're a genius, they are helping. They are always trying to recruit you, but this applies to pretty much any company. So I don't believe this mindset that you have to be a genius to work for Amazon is true. So the single most important thing for an Amazon interview is your skills, your skill set, right? So if you're extraordinary for your job, then you should pretty much get the job. And now, of course, you should read the leadership principles and all that stuff, but still, there's one thing that matters the most for an Amazon interview, that's your skills. So the simple answer to this question is no. However, keep in mind that I hired quite a few people, especially for IT projects in the past, and I've also been involved in an HR software for a number of years, and I closely watched around 200 hiring managers and how they perform for a number of years. So this would be to gain some credibility here if you want. But also I'm trying to always stay connected with the latest developments in hiring, and especially in the case of Amazon. And to be honest, there are many people that write to me with lots of insight about how these things works, and especially how they could have done even better than this. So don't get me wrong, people are not telling me, hey, despite the fact that I signed the NDA, let me send you this. No, they don't do this, but they do tell me tips and tricks that are really helpful, that help me to brainstorm and to give you the best possible information. And you might have seen some slides in my videos, and I always try to gather as much information as possible from various online resources to make it as relevant as possible. Now, you can imagine here that I won't advise you to lie within your own interview, but from here to employing a mindset to constrain yourself to be very careful not to lie within a job interview, I believe that's bad advice. Why is bad advice? Because this is actually a business encounter between you and another party. You want to win over a job here. So how you win over the job, I mean, that very much depends on the situation. Now, what I would like to highlight here is that a good applicant will never tell a fake story, a completely fake story. Now, the difference between a good and a great candidate is that the good ones tell stories that are pretty boring, right, and might lack a bit of substance in them, and the great ones always make that story look compelling, Like even if your answer isn't that specific and isn't that impressive in terms of numbers, if you add some spice to it, or if you add some detail to it, you can win over your audience, and you can score maybe even more points than a candidate that doesn't know to tell the story but has a great one in place, right? So this would be the main differentiator. All right, so if you're looking for answers to various behavioral questions, and if you cannot find the answers within my own previous series of videos, I actually have a playlist with this. I also included some links in the video description of various online resources that I use myself to inspire when answering that list of 35 most common behavioral questions. Now, this one often applies to international students that are from different cultures. And you see, when you're talking with someone that has different, maybe not different values, but different ways to showcase their emotions, there's a very high risk of being misunderstood. So something that I would very much encourage you to do is to practice diplomacy whenever being on a job interview. Try to be diplomatic whatever you do, and try to look professional. Like, for instance, don't laugh too much, don't be too sad. Try to act professional, and whatever professional means in your case, and you'll be fine, because there are many people that are very well intended. I mean, why wouldn't you if you're applying for a job at such a company? But because that they react in certain ways, and they actually fall into the trap of being too casual during the interview, they tend to be evaluated on their on the recruiter's bias, and you don't want that to happen. And for this, again, my best advice to you would be to use diplomacy. So this is actually something quite interesting that I didn't know existed until recently. And actually, Amazon, I think, used to have some core values, and actually they are 4 of their 14 leadership principles. And the reason why they talk about these core values, they still talk about these core values, is because they use them for engineering roles all the time. So if you're an engineer, then the 4 leadership principles that count the most in your case are customer obsession, ownership, invent and simplify, and dive deep. So this is something that I believe it's useful to know. So I hope you found this information useful, and thank you very much for watching.